back on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. I have to tell you that crypto and the whole business of Bitcoin and all of that, it reminded me a lot when it first came out. It reminded me a lot of when I worked in the insurance and finance industry in the 90s, and people started rolling out these new quote unquote instruments of risk and of derivatives and so on. They had these huge folders filled with equations. And Troy, unfortunately, you're going to have to bleep out the next sentence, but I thought there are two possibilities here. One is I'm not nearly as smart and as good at math as I thought I was. And the other is that this is all bullshit. However, I proved to be right in the 90s. I was not as dumb as I feared. Now crypto, I'm beginning to feel the same way. Of course, the big story in recent days and weeks has been the fall of Sam Bankman-Fried, the 30-year-old ex-multi-billionaire who is going to take crypto with its acknowledged shady, problematic record and make it respectable. And I had treasure the photograph of this young man in his baggy shorts and hairy knees and t-shirt on a stage with Bill Clinton and Tony Blair wearing their suits because they dress up for him, not vice versa. Those days may be past us now, but the fall of Sam Bankman-Fried, the supposedly solid crypto guy, big political contributor, mostly but not exclusively to Democrats, it prompted me to choose it as the topic for my regular conversation with Professor Richard Wolff. I always look forward to these conversations. Richard Wolff, of course, host of Economic Update, economist, economic historian, author, and so much more. So without any further ado, Richard Wolff, welcome back to the program.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, I'm glad to have you, and particularly glad to have you on the subject of crypto, because it seems I'll start with this. It seems as if everything old is new again, and everything new is old again. And crypto came along, and the great innovation was governments were not going to regulate us, and this is peer-to-peer, and this is all of that. But right away, as along with many others said, a lot of people are going to lose money on this. This just doesn't sound right. Is crypto as much of a fraud as I think it is?
Well, I'm afraid the basic answer is not so much that it's a fraud, but that it is. I mean, the short answer is yes. I mean, it is the latest incarnation. I was going to give a long-winded.
You should not have said that while I was sipping my coffee off camera. I almost spit it up like Danny Thomas on Make Room for Daddy. Anyway, old reference there, but we'll get it.
What it is the tiresome reincarnation of a burden of capitalism. One of capitalism's worst burdens is that it has plagued us from its origins in England back in the 18th century, when we had the most famous of these, because it was so iconic, was a so-called tulip mania, where people invested wild amounts of money in these beautiful flowers that came originally from the Netherlands. These tulips, which could be shipped all over the world and make your home beautiful and your garden beautiful and all the rest. And it was a surefire way to make a ton of money by buying and holding and selling tulip bulbs. Okay. That this happens every few years in the history of capitalism is bad enough. But that it can happen over and over again in a short enough time that adults should remember the last one, and they still are falling for this, that's kind of a depressing commentary on the human race, almost in this way. Hucksterism is not unique to capitalism, but like so many things that aren't unique to capitalism, capitalism ratcheted it up, rationalized it, organized it, and made it into a very big business. There is an adage on Wall Street that I think most people have heard. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is, in fact, not true. That should have been the first thing that people hear. We all remember, or I hope we do, Bernie Madoff. Bernie Madoff did a classic Ponzi type scheme. He used money given by people later to give ridiculous returns to people who gave him money earlier, thereby establishing the reputation that he can deliver 20-30% a year to enough people that by the time they figured out that he couldn't, he had absconded, in his case, with tens of billions of dollars. Having said all of that, it's not only a scam, or let's put it this way, it's a scam that can teach us a lesson. All scams have to have some element of credibility, otherwise they don't work. So if you search hard enough in most scams, you will find the kernel of something that's reasonable. In the case of crypto, there were two big things that made it reasonable. Number one, that here was a way to break free of the stifling, what shall we call it, the stifling cabal of our leading financial instruments and institutions and our government. Together, they manufacture the monetary system. The way they are doing it now with the Federal Reserve and Janet Yellen over at the Treasury, they are organizing how to save capitalism yet again by manipulating the availability of money or the price, the interest rate, price of money borrowing, and so on. And this was to be freedom from all of that. Look, that's a revolutionary impulse. I empathize. I sympathize. I would like to get something, important parts of the economy out from under the way capitalism has organized it. And the crypto people at the beginning cashed in on that. The second thing they had was the new blockchain technology that allows for all kinds of activity and movement and contracts and agreements that don't have to go through the usual institutional gatekeepers. They are person to person, institution to institution. And that's, again, an impulse to break out of the stifling, self-serving elite that run the country and have for so long. So they had that. Good return, new technology, breaking out of a system that these people like us are critical of. But here comes now the problem. That is not easy to do. That's why so many revolutionary efforts have come short. It's a very difficult thing to impinge on any of the institutional arrangements capitalism, by 5 centuries of trial and error, has assembled. So you have to have a lot of humility as you go about doing whatever it is you're doing to break away. Simply creating through the blockchain system another currency, I mean, is that a step in that direction? Yeah, it could be. But now you're going to have a problem. Number one, every crook in the world who needs to escape the supervision and the surveillance of the now global capitalist system is going to see whether they can use you to hide money, to escape supervision, for every kind of dangerous, volatile activity. So you're bringing in a bunch of people with absolutely no commitment to your institution other than escaping something else. And if they do, okay, well, they'll venture some more. And the minute they don't, they're gone. So that's a very big destabilizer. Number two, if you know anything about the history of bank finance or corporate finance of any kind, you'll know that it is a flashpoint of capitalism's instability. It's constantly having crashes every 4 to 7 years, according to the National Bureau, which means you have to have governmental backstopping. Otherwise, you'll never get through even the first one of these. The government has to be able and willing and institutionally ready to intervene massively, pumping up the money supply or reducing it, dropping interest rates to zero or negative, jacking them up, just like we're seeing now. There is nothing to do that for the crypto world. They have no government guarantee. They have no developed institute. Most of the central banks in the world look upon them as interlopers, as enemies. They're happy to see them crash tomorrow. They don't want, they're slowly developing their own supervised version, and they'll get the governments to back them up when they're good and ready. But they never allowed that the crypto people would be the ones to develop it. They poo-pooed the idea from the beginning. When they turned out to be wrong, that the appeal of this thing would be enormous, then they realized they got to join, and then they have to use their connection with the government to get the government to support their version and not the other one, which is what we're seeing now. Governments are, in fact, working with central banks and large institutions to develop their own cryptocurrencies, while the pioneers, who have every right to say, hey, we took all the risk, they're being dropped like flies in the wake of this collapse now. And here's the saddest thing that also play. One of the things that makes a scam successful is the complicity of the scammy, the one who is suckered in. You know, people, if they are very needy, because their financial situation is terrible, are more likely to take risks. Not all of them, but many of them are more likely to take crazy risks in the wild. You know, that's why they go to the racetrack. That's why they go to the OTB. That's why they do all those things. Gambling is a serious disease in this country. We have Gamblers Anonymous, just like we have Alcoholics Anonymous. And we live in an economy that is very, very bad for an enormous number of what we used to call well-paid working class people, or if you like, middle class. Apparently makes people feel better if you change their name. Nobody wants to be a bus driver. Everybody's a transportation engineer. Okay, I get it. That's all right. But that middle class or upper working class or whatever you want to call it is in deep trouble over the last 25 years. They are desperate. That's why they're borrowing money way beyond what they can ever reasonably pay back. That's what the students are doing, desperate. A BA is worth less in terms of getting a job than it ever was, and people are borrowing more than they ever did to get a degree that's less valuable. I mean, these are signs. Well, for me, crypto is another one. I have encountered, I can't tell you how many young men and women, although it's particularly young men, who have told me, they're working class guys, they've told me that they have, and I'm taken aback, $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in Bitcoin or one of the other cryptos, and they've made so much money. And when I say to them, look, you know, I've been doing this for 50 years. I'm telling you, you're gonna lose. If you made money, get the hell out of there. Don't throw good money after bad. Don't do it. And then I rattle off to them Bernie Madoff or the Tulip Mania or, you know, Argentinian land or beef or
Florida land rush is one that comes to mind.
Florida is another one. I mean, it never stops. And they look at me and they give me that look that I call the sort of the puppy. When the puppy has done something on the rug that the puppy kind of knows it shouldn't have done, and now you confront the puppy with the newspaper in your hand, telling the puppy, hey, you're supposed to do that outside, then the puppy looks at you with those eyes. They know these workers know what I'm telling them is true, but I'm telling them, just don't do it. It's like saying to a drug addict, just don't do it. There's no way to process this empty wording, and that's where we are. And it's a tragedy for those people. I have not much sympathy for the billionaire. I'm sure he has. That stupid they're not. They've all squirreled away money.
Yeah.
The last time I saw him, he was in the Bahamas. In case you don't know, in the Bahamas is where a lot of these folks go because it's easy to hide there and to prevent extradition and prevent financial authorities. It's like going to the Cayman Islands, or Switzerland used to be that way. It's not so much anymore. But there are plenty of other places in the world where these people go. And as to what he says about giving to the Democrats, look, I don't know him, so I can't comment, but I can tell you that almost all the scammers come up with very fanciful stories about the absolutely stunningly great values that they were pursuing. And I'm sure for some of them it's probably true, but they were mainly in the business of hustling. And they now have come to the end of the hustle, and it's very like the end of all the preceding hustles.
Well, a lot to reflect on there, Richard Wolff, and just a couple things I wanted to touch on. First of all, yes, Wall Street says if something is too good to be true, it probably is. I think they also say if it's too good to be true, get in early and get out early. But on this business of gambling, gambling, yes, of course, it's an addiction to it, can be, but states do it, Powerball, the lottery, so on. They prey on hope, right? It's almost a psychological escape valve that's also a money maker for the states to hope. I remember when I was a teenager, one of my relatives showed me a 2-page spread in Newsweek magazine of lottery winners when the lotteries were still fairly new. And me being a little nerd, I could step you through how I did it, but I won't bore you. I thought, gee, how thick would Newsweek magazine be if they also had pictures of all the losers? That issue of Newsweek would have had to have been about 1.5 miles thick. So when you publish the pictures, you're already kind of psychologically saying, see, these people could do it. You're leaving out the enormous number of people who just wasted their money. So I guess that in a sense, maybe the crypto craze and the kinds of people you're describing who invested in it, in a sense, they're victims of that, right? But they're also looking for a way out of the trap that it seems to me, I'm curious your thoughts, but it seems to me they're looking for a way out of the endless grind and precarity and fear that constitutes a working person's life today. I don't know. What do you think?
I could not agree more. I think there are a whole host. And in other words, your point is even stronger than you're making it. There are a whole set of activities that are relatively cheap, relatively riskless, that you can take to comfort yourself, to console yourself for the horrific trap you find yourself in. To decide that your job is awful, that your pay is inadequate, that your housing circumstance is constricting you and your family, and so on. That's a very difficult set of recognitions to admit to yourself. And if you do, or even partly, or even only half consciously, then you need an escape. I understand why people go to the bar and drink too many, or they go to the racetrack and bet too much. Let me give you several of the examples, not just investing in crypto because of the lure that suddenly you're a fantastically rich person. Your job may stink, but you have so much money that what you can do after the job is more than go for those 2 happy hours at the bar that they advertise. But here's one that may be a bit more controversial. Voting. What in the world are you doing? You're telling people, look, once a year, second week of November, here's a thing we're going to let you do. You go into a little booth with a whole bunch of other people, you wait online, and you go in there and you're exercising your vote. Okay, but if you're not retarded in a way that is crippling, then you understand that your ability to influence the outcome of that election is right up there with your ability to win the lottery, a 1 in a million or 1 in a 2 million. I mean, come on. I mean, this is not difficult, but you need to do it. Very important. It was a brilliant understanding of those who recognized suffrage, giving people a vote, will make a system more durable, more tolerable than if you don't. Create an illusion, create a ritual. You go and you make these politicians who normally lord it over you come to your neighborhood and shake your hand as if they know or care about you, as if they're not going to do what the person who donates 10 million to their campaign would like them. People know, but it's a chance. It's a chance. That's what these things are all like that. It's a chance. You know, there's a tragedy here because there really is an alternative, which is you get together with your fellow workers and you build a union and you build a political party to challenge the whole way this system works, so that not just you, but all of them and your children and the succeeding generations will have a better life than what you've been stuck in here and what you understand to be such a constriction on what you could be doing, what you should be doing, what you could be contributing to the society compared to what you're required to do in that little cubicle for the bad salary you get. But it's cheap, you know. You're all alone in that voting booth. You can do whatever you want. No one will know. And you can feel it. And likewise, you can give some money to crypto. It's not going to come back. You're not going to go to jail for doing it. Whereas if you try to organize against the system to really make a change, everybody knows, in the words of Leonard Cohen's great song, everybody knows you're going to get into trouble. And so these are cheap, easy, and relatively riskless pushes back in their little way. And I'm glad, you know, that I want us to be able to vote. I'm not against voting, but it has to be understood to be a very small step in a very big process.
Everybody knows the dice are loaded. Everybody knows the game is fixed. I believe that's the Leonard Cohen.
Yep.
You know, this may seem out of the blue, Richard Wolff, but one of the thoughts I had while you were speaking was that, in a sense, first of all, this fantasy of getting rich, as inequality gets outrageously worse, this fantasy of getting rich, in a way, it almost replaces the role the church used to have in society, doesn't it? In the sense that, you know, 100, 150 years ago, when Christianity was essentially the state religion of the United States, and I'm not knocking the Christianity of Martin Luther King or anyone else, but the fact is you could all, and in Europe, medieval Europe and later, you could always say, well, I might go to heaven, right? This life is lousy. It's lousy being a serf, but who knows? Maybe, you know, I'll die. If I'm nice enough, I'll get into heaven. Things are going to be great. Then I'll have a mansion. Seems to me that to a certain extent, these escape vows, they may not be intentionally designed by the system, quote unquote, that we live in, but they serve a very useful purpose, right? And as for voting, well, it seems to me, you know, the political scientist Sheldon Wollin's work, of course, and he's talked about inverted totalitarianism and how people will accept what they wouldn't accept if you give them two versions of it to pick from, right? That's certainly one part of it. But another is, it's almost, I think what you're saying, since you are saying there's nothing wrong with voting, and I agree with that, that it becomes a kind of homeopathic inoculation against a truly activist democracy, right? Well, I voted, you know, I mean, it's like, well, what else did you do? Did you get out there and organize your fellow workers? Did you organize a petition, a ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage to $20? Did you, because, you know, there's a bunch of things you could do when it's not November 8th. And those things might be even more important. So I guess that's related to what you're saying, isn't it? I mean, that's
yes, but you know, if I could be philosophical for a moment and take us back to one of my inspirations, the German philosopher Hegel, who was Marx's teacher. It's not either or. It's not that voting is good or voting is bad. It's understanding that voting, like everything else, has its positive and negative sides to it. Its positive and negative social consequences. Yes, it gives us a bit of power, but no, it also gives us the illusion that we are in control. And one of them is good, and the other one, the bit of power is good. The illusion is just terrible. It's good that people are active, but it's bad that they're active on such a limited terrain that the kind of activity we really need, what changes our society, is not going to be, you know, the number of people who bet on crypto. I mean, to think like that means you've excluded a whole lot of other things that there's no logic for you to do. And I would warn people that one of the lessons of crypto, like the lesson of Bernie Madoff or the tulips or any of the others, is really that Wall Street is giving you a piece of genuine wisdom that goes far beyond Wall Street. If it's too good to be true, the very least you owe yourself is to be very skeptical. Not necessarily not to do it. You can do it. There are some things that go from rags to riches. That happens. That's why we keep hearing about it, because every scammer has to attach himself or herself to one of those that happened in order to enhance the believability of the one they're trying to sell you. And you should know that, but it should also give you a realistic sense. And what we've seen now again and again is people, innocents who really get fleeced here out of whatever little extra money they have saved and put aside. The tragedy there is just, it's just very hard. And by the way, let me be an economist. One last point. It goes beyond the sadness we've been talking about. Think about what get rich quick does. You have millions of people who put $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000 into crypto. It makes the fellow there we're all hearing about, if I understand, he was worth $50 billion or some enormous amount of money. Okay, all of those little people who took their 5, 10, and 15,000 would, in all likelihood, have spent that money on things they needed in their family. Another car so that the spouse could get to and from work, or maybe put it aside for the kids' education. Instead, a vast amount of spending is not going to happen, because the 50 billion collected by Joe Blow over there, you can't spend that, so he's going to save it. We're going to have an economy that is impoverished in many ways, because so much of the wealth is concentrated in a few people. It's like saying, isn't it wonderful over the last 2 or 3 years that housing prices went up as dramatically as they did? And the answer to that is, well, that's very nice for the people who own homes, but that's a very small percentage of people whose homes went up in value. Even if you take them all together, Meanwhile, what you have done is created a bubble in housing.
Right.
And as interest rates go up, boom, that crashes. We're going to have a crash this year or next. That is a recession of one kind or another, led by the housing industry. But when it was going up, they're wonderful without understanding the absurd risk that this now entailed, which we're living through. It's the same thing. Oh, we can do with crypto. We won't be surveilled by the government. Yeah, but what are you going into? A very risky business with no governmental backstop.
And I know we're out of time, but the other dimension of this to me is just, I remember when the internet was first coming online and people were issuing declarations of independence for the internet, and the internet was going to be run by the people, and it was, democratic and lateral. And of course, it quickly became the purview of the billionaires and and a means of social control to a large extent. Now we have crypto is going to be democratic. Of course, people sucked up a lot of money and either you went to jail, got away or whatever. I mean, that strikes me as something inherent in our economic system, that whenever something like this comes up, people are allowed to grab it. And the more they grab, the more they can get. It's like a black hole. It just sucks in everything around it.
I love that you brought up the 1990s were the period of the internet taking off. And then in the early months of 2020, we had a complete economic crash on Wall Street, which even to this day, 22 years later, is called the dot-com crash of the year 2000. It's called dot-com because there were all these companies valued in the tens of billions of dollars that had never earned a profit, whose costs were running way ahead of any conceivable revenue flow for years into the future, but were able to hype it all in exactly the same way the crypto people. I mean, it literally is one of the umpteen examples of what happens here. You either get in early and get out, which requires you to know something early, which many people can't, or to have the discipline to get out once you've made a reasonable profit, which is a discipline that evades most people too. You put that together, that a very small number of people will ever heed that advice. Meanwhile, we have these people self-destructing financially. It's very sad to watch.
It is indeed. And it's a systemic problem, isn't it? Yep. So unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it there. But Richard Wolff, again, host of Economic Update, author, economist, economic historian, always very enlightening and a great pleasure to speak with you. And as always, thank you for coming on the program.
My pleasure, RJ. And you're doing a public service, as I say to my friends, and I'll say it publicly, to put these issues out and to have these conversations. It's something the country badly needs, and many of us know that you're a pioneer in doing it, and we're grateful for it.
Well, I really appreciate that. Thank you. And we will be right back after this. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.